Good morning everyone, or good afternoon to our friends over in New Zealand. Such a pleasure to have you all with us today as we discuss ways in which cyclists and motorists can share the road safely. The webinar is proudly brought to you by the National Road Safety Partnership Program, or NRSPP, in partnership with the ARB Group and of course the Amy Gillett Foundation. My name is Angela Raths, the Online Training Coordinator at ARB Group. I will co-moderate this session and provide technical support if required, and my details will pop up on the screen in just a short moment. There I am. If you do experience any issues at all, please feel free to get in touch. My esteemed colleague Jerome joins me in the studio as our primary moderator today, and he is of course the manager of this excellent program. So Jerome, for anyone joining us for the first time, could you give us a quick rundown about the NRSPP and its purpose?
Certainly, Angela, thank you. The NRSPP has been established to provide a collaborative network for Australian businesses and organisations to help them create a positive road safety culture, both internally and externally. It aims to help organisations of all sizes across all sectors to share and build road safety initiatives specific to their own workplaces and beyond. It's delivered by ARB and funded primarily by a government coalition and ARB. So for more information, feel free, and more tools, just like this webinar, feel free to go to our website. And the other part of the program, as I mentioned, is so that's where I'm really looking forward to hearing from Simon today, explaining how to do it in a safe way.
Absolutely, and we'll just cover off a few more formalities before that happens, so your attention for a few more moments, ladies and gentlemen. As always, we're recording today's session and we'll be sure to share the footage with all of you once the webinar has concluded, so keep an eye on your email for that. Webinars do work best when they're interactive, so please don't be shy. We'd be delighted, in fact, to address any questions along the way, so please type those into the questions box or into the chat box, and we'll address them as we go. So now the man of the hour, our presenter today, I'll talk a little bit about him and the Amy Gillett Foundation. So the establishment of the Amy Gillett Foundation came about from tragic circumstances, and the team have since worked tirelessly to ensure a safer riding environment for cyclists in Australia. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome Simon Gillett, co-founder of the Amy Gillett Foundation, to the studio today. Welcome, Simon.
Thanks, Angela. Jerome.
How are you going today? You well?
I'm good, thanks.
Thank you so much again for coming all the way here to talk a little bit more about the Amy Gillett Foundation and how it all came about. So please do tell us a little bit more about you and the foundation.
Yeah, as you mentioned, came about after the death of my wife Amy back in 2005, and we tried to make something positive coming out of what was obviously a bad period in our lives, and the foundation was born back then. And primary goal is to try and make the environment on the road safer for people that choose to use a bike as a mode of transport. And that's our sole focus. We have another side to our organisation which stems from Amy's sporting side, which is to help an up-and-coming young female bike rider who's on the verge of breaking into an international competition to get experience overseas, internationally, and make that jump. And so we run a scholarship program each year in conjunction with the Australian Institute of Sport and Cycling Australia, and Wiggle Honda team in Europe. So that's been really, really successful.
And did you have any luck with the Olympics of late?
We had one of our scholarship holders was in the Olympic team, Rachel Nayland. Unfortunately, things didn't work out exactly as the team had planned, and their top finish was 8th. But road racing is a pretty tough game, and Rachel was successful in the World Championships a couple of years prior to that, running second, which is a pretty big effort. So
eighth in the world is pretty amazing.
Geez, yeah, I was going to say, don't be too hard on them.
we like the silverware.
Of course.
Yeah, so that's a secondary part of our foundation. As I said, the main part is road safety, and when you set up an organisation such as the foundation, it takes quite a while to get credibility and get a name, build a brand, and become recognised in the space. And so we set about trying to fill in gaps in knowledge by sponsoring a PhD student who's now Dr. Marilyn Johnson, who Jerome just mentioned recently has returned from a trip overseas, doing all sorts of stuff she assures us on road safety. We're a bit dubious, but and she has conducted a lot of research and filled in a lot of gaps in our knowledge, and is a go-to person in this country in the cycling road safety space, and still works with the foundation, I'm really pleased to say, so that when we wanted to talk to government or to authorities, we can speak with confidence and with authority, because we're backing up our stated positions with research and with facts, and Marilyn has been absolutely crucial for us in that role, and that's probably evidenced by the results we're getting now with our push for national legislation for minimum passing distance, and we've been successful now in Queensland, New South Wales, ACT, Tasmania and South Australia in getting that legislation into place, and Victoria is our next target, so watch that space. The parliamentary inquiry has just concluded and has recommended that legislation be introduced here as well. So you can't get those sort of results without research and facts to back up your argument, and so that sort of initial early work we did, which was, it's a long time to fruition. You start with a PhD student, and then some 4 or 5 years later they finish their studies, and then some 4 or 5 years after that they're a recognised expert in the field. So there was a credit to the board of the foundation back in the early days. They had the foresight to put in place a program that was going to be delivering results 10 years down the track.
So you'd say it's a good investment?
A good investment, yeah. Obviously, yeah, long-term vision required there. So that's really set us up to get to where we are now.
Fantastic.
So we have a very simple vision and mission, safe cycling in Australia with a vision of 0 bike-related fatalities. And that's a fairly lofty ambition, but it's a bit like a workplace. You can't aim for just a few. We believe you have to aim for 0. And that's been our vision for a long time, and it's now reflected, I think, with TAC in Victoria with their Towards Zero campaign, which started this year. So we work on two sides. We recognise that there's 2 players in this game. It's people driving a car and people on a bike, and there needs to be both behavioural and infrastructure and legislative changes that affect both sides of that equation. And of course, safer vehicles is another really important part of this whole thing, and I think the motor industry is really making leaps and bounds progress in the last few years in terms of in-car technology that can make drivers safer, but also looking at making vulnerable road users safer. So that's where we focus. Probably most of our stuff is on the legislative and behavioural change, the hard stuff, and that's where we do most of our work.
What would you say to, I guess when you're talking about the infrastructure, the safe roads and those sort of questions, what would you say to the people out there who are always arguing that cyclists should be registered just like a car?
I love that argument.
Might as well start big.
It's a valid question, but when you actually look into the facts behind it, it becomes pretty obvious that it's not going to make a lot of difference. And registration typically $500, $250 of that will be insurance, and $250 will be to run the system. So anybody that believes that your rego is paying for road infrastructure needs to take a good hard look at the federal government budget, because not even the 58 cents a litre that you pay every litre to the government in fuel goes towards road infrastructure. That goes into consolidated revenue. And if you assume that every bike rider in Australia did register their bike, you'd probably pay for about 200 kilometres of freeway if you put all the funds towards that. So it's not, registration doesn't equal infrastructure, and it doesn't equal safety.
Could you then say on the other side, if cyclists did have to be registered, would there have to be part of the roadway would have to be given up to make sure cyclists have their fair share then?
I don't think in Australia, with our tiny population and our vast distances, we're ever going to be in a place where we have separated infrastructure for cyclists, and that's pretty obvious if you take a drive out in the country, but also take a drive around somewhere like Sydney. There is no room in many places for separated infrastructure, and I don't think that's going to happen. So it has to be a focus, we believe, on changing behaviours and changing attitudes so that people become accepting of all forms of transport, really. So in terms of cycling, looking at it from a health perspective, we know that it's good for you from a fitness perspective, it's good from a health perspective, it's good for the environment obviously, and it's also good for the transport system in terms of taking cars off the road. Putting bikes on the road actually takes a lot less space than a vehicle. So even though some people may get frustrated, if you look at the amount of road infrastructure and taken up by bikes compared to people transporting, commuting, single occupancy in cars, it's actually a lot more efficient. But there's two costs here. There's an economic cost and the cost of transport congestion, and these figures I think are 2005. We're talking about doubling of the congestion cost to the Australian economy by 2030, and 2030, that seemed a long way ago, a long way away a few years ago, but it's actually coming up pretty quickly. So that's a doubling of congestion on the roads and cost to our economy. And then there's a human cost as well, which is on 2013-14 data, nearly 11,000 hospitalisations and 38 fatalities per year. So they're the things that we believe needs to be addressed. And the thing that really worries us is that cycling has been increasing in popularity and the numbers of people electing to take up cycling as either a sport, a hobby or a commuting option, but the injury rate is actually increasing faster than the increase in participation. So that's exactly opposite to what's happening on the roads in terms of motor vehicles, where the injury rate is actually reducing when you compare it to the number of vehicles registered.
And what's the main sort of injuries?
Bear in mind these costs are only hospitalisations. There are many injuries that probably don't get to that stage, but are still significant and serious. In terms of what they are, I don't have the breakdown on that data, but if you hit the deck on your bike, I think you've already done that a couple of times, Jerome, you're talking skin off and broken limbs basically, and that's on the light side.
I guess that's actually another topical question we can sort of throw in now as well. What about helmets? What's your thoughts around them? Because I know people sit there and argue if helmets weren't law, more people would cycle.
I actually read an article online this week where a woman died in the UK on coming back from a family outing at the Sunday at the pub to celebrate her birthday, and she turned around to take a selfie, hit the deck and died. And the family acknowledged just this week that she would be alive had she been wearing a helmet, but wasn't in that occasion. I know all the arguments, and I know people say a lot more people would ride bikes, and I know there are plenty of countries around the world where you don't need to wear a helmet. But I can speak from personal experience. I wouldn't be here if I hadn't been wearing a helmet on several occasions, and I know a lot of people that would be in the same situation. And I just think it just makes common sense to protect the most vulnerable part of your body. And it seems to be that a lot of times the worst head injuries occur in the slowest speed falls, where if you hit the deck at high speed you tend to bounce and slide. Terrible. It's not a good thing to think about, but that's what happens. The slow speed impacts seem to be the ones that do the most damage, and we all know the one punch incidents that's very big in the media at the moment. Those deaths are not occurring from the punch, they're occurring from the head hitting the deck afterwards, and they're not high-speed falls, so you only need to fall from 6 feet onto the ground with an unprotected head, and you're in big trouble.
No, I can attest to that. As you mentioned, I went over, got car doored by a federal police officer on Collins Street, and went up, and I was on the deck, and my helmet saved my life, so I would agree.
Yeah, we could argue this one and for a long time. Like in the States, I think you can ride a motorbike without wearing a helmet.
That's crazy, though.
Not too clever, I wouldn't have thought.
I think there's something of Holland, I was saying 30 or 40% of deaths could have been avoided over there with cyclists if they've been wearing a helmet.
Yeah. And I think I can remember when that legislation came in, it was probably 88 or 89, or very close to that, and now most people, they feel very, very uncomfortable having gotten used to wearing that helmet to not be, if you forget to put it on. So yeah, I think we'll just leave that one as a very good idea, and I don't believe
comes down to the individual in the end.
Yeah, why take that risk? So what we're doing, I mentioned our Meter Matters campaign. That's probably our key campaign, and launched on the steps of Parliament House in 2009. Legislative change, and as I mentioned, we're very close to getting all of the eastern states once Victoria comes on board, and then we're hoping WA will fall into line. So,
as a Victorian, I'm a little bit disappointed we're not already on board, truthfully.
The risk of being controversial, our Premier doesn't even think we need a rail line to the airport. Yep. So,
all right, fair enough. Point taken.
But I think I think every government takes a long, hard look at this, and they consult all sides of the equation in terms of police and your Vic Roads and your road safety people and ourselves and Bike Network and Cycling Australia, etc., etc., etc. And it's really comforting and really reassuring to find that each of the parliament that's a really good test of the case and the argument is that it's been tested 6 times now, and 6 times to argue that this legislation was introduced on a whim. It's actually been pretty seriously tested. We have a program called Cycle, which was initially started in conjunction with Cycling Australia, and that's aimed at educating people getting on bikes and Auskick for cycling. And we're seeing a lot of people who are taking up cycling for if not the first time, after a very, very long break in their middle age. And you'll see that with the popularity of events and the number of people in that middle-aged demographic that are turning up to events. We just had our Grand Fondo in Lawn, 5,500 people, and a huge spike, and a big part of that field is your 40 to 55, 60 age group, and a lot of those people are getting back into cycling or perhaps starting cycling for the first time, and we've got a few generations now that haven't ridden bikes much at all. So to be able to have that knowledge, somewhere to go to get that knowledge, how to set up your bike and how to be safe is really important. We have a Cycle Safe Communities program which provides artwork and messaging for primarily aimed at government, both state and local, and it enables them to run a bike safety campaign from a visual perspective without having to get artwork created. So we've got consistent messaging available at a really reasonable price, and that's being rolled out all around the country as we speak, and we've even got now in a month or two. So
that's fantastic.
Really good visual to have on the road, and of course we have our partnerships with Subaru and Toll, and Toll have a lot of vehicles that are branded and do a lot of messaging with their driving workforce.
We've got a question here from Frank, and the question is basically, we've heard a lot about the cyclist engaging component. What about, is there moves to include training for new drivers around sharing the road with cyclists?
Absolutely, and that really comes back to the learner driver stage, and what we're targeting there is the questions that learner drivers are required to answer. And every state is different, but out of all the questions that you get asked, there may be only a handful on cycling, and they weren't always popping up in the test that you may sit. So what we would like to see is that a percentage of those questions are vulnerable road user and cycling related when every learner driver sits their test anywhere in the country. We've done a few advertising campaigns with state governments. The Two-Way Street campaign was rolled out a couple of years ago in New South Wales, and that that collateral and that IP is available to be used anywhere in the country. It's not limited just to New South Wales, and so that's available for governments to look at and to utilise as required. And I've already mentioned the research side of things. That's a really key cornerstone of our organisation.
Evidence-based policy will certainly win the way, one would hope.
You would hope. Our Meter Matters campaign, just coming back to that again, simple premise is don't hit a cyclist. And that may seem a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for?
Obvious.
Where a young female driver hit and killed a cyclist on a two-lane road with a narrow shoulder on a Saturday, actually on a Sunday morning, and there was only one other vehicle on that road at the time, and it was coming in the opposite direction. And when the police asked her what happened, she said she didn't know what to do. So she had three choices: run over the cyclist, slow down, or risk a head-on by passing at the wrong time. And that's a really scary thing, because I'm sure she's not alone. And so that simple premise, while it's stating the bleeding obvious, it probably needs to be stated. So we've got our legislation is limit. Bear in mind their minimums. There's a great little ad I've seen online where they're asking people to stand at the train station when the train goes past at 100 k's an hour, a metre from the edge of the platform. You don't feel very comfortable. So we stress that that is a minimum. And what you need to bear in mind is if the worst thing happens and there is a fatality, the driver doesn't walk away unscathed either. Like, everybody's affected, and you just do not want to be in that situation, that position.
We did have a comment here, sorry Simon, about the leaving a metre gap, and this Fred said to us that it's a little bit hard to leave a metre when the cyclist is on the outside of the white line of the cycling lane. So what would you say to that?
What are your options?
You've got a few.
Well, as a driver, white line, I'm thinking about St Kilda Road right now, where that white line's painted right in the doors, if possible. And there may be other reasons too, like that cyclist may have seen a car door about to open. There may be a pothole, there may be glass on the road, there may be some other obstruction. So it's important to realise from a motoring perspective that just because there's a white line painted on the road, it doesn't make it a cycling lane. Cycling lanes have very specific legislative requirements to make them a cycling lane, and just the simple painting of a white line is not it. And in many cases, it is safer to ride on the other side of that line that's not actually a cycling lane than it is to ride on the left-hand side of it. And so, as I said, you have a couple of choices there. You can white lanes to pass.
I guess the other thing for someone who's driving the vehicle, it's going to be a few seconds, 10 seconds. It doesn't really matter for your journey, but you just take that moment, check out the cyclist.
And if you're in Melbourne, chances are you're going to meet them at the same lights, next set of lights anyway. So that's my experience. I mentioned our partnerships with some of our sponsors, Toll in particular, and it's really encouraging to see their commitment to try to make the roads a safer place, particularly from the heavy vehicle industry. They're not just a heavy vehicle transport company, they actually have a lot of couriers on the road as well. And we do quite a bit of work around the country talking with their drivers and running education sessions. And I can guarantee you, when you're sitting up in Rockhampton with a bunch of truckies in stubbies and singlets with their arms all folded, the first question that comes up is cyclist registration, the next one that comes up is riding in bunches on the road, and the next one, yeah, all the usual questions. But having that engagement with these guys is really important because you can put the perspective from the cycling side, and most of the time they get it. And we've had quite a bit of feedback from riders, just unsolicited, particularly on social media. They've been riding somewhere and this toll truck's given them a big wide berth, and that sort of messaging in that industry I think is really important.
Do you see any the toll drivers joining in your bike rides as well?
We've got our Share the Road tour coming up in November. We're recreating our original route, which was Canberra down to Melbourne via the mountains, just on 1000k I think. And we're bringing that Matters message and legislative push to the Victorian Government in the steps of Parliament House on the 24th of November. And yeah, we have two toll employees doing that ride.
Do you have any politicians at all? Give them some sort of focus for their energy?
We all think we're politicians. No, we haven't actually had any politicians on that ride. We have extended invitations. They do have a poly pedal which comes in pretty close to the same time of year, which makes it a little difficult to, they tell us they're busy, to take the time, but the invitation is always there. Having said that, Shane Rattenbury and ACT has joined us last year for the last day of a ride, and I believe he's joining us for the first day of our departure out of Canberra down to Jindabyne.
Fantastic.
Which is great to see. Other things we've been able to do with Toll, apart from messaging on their trucks, we're able to connect Toll and 3M to put the reflective tape on the side of their big vehicles to make them impossible to miss in the dark if you're approaching from the side. We've done a safety video in conjunction with Volvo Trucks talking about the safety technology that's built into the heavy vehicles in terms of blind spot cameras and blind spot radars, etc. And as I mentioned, a couple of toll employees on our Share the Road tour. That's just an image of the truck, and as you can see, you're not going to miss that in the headlights at night. So that's pretty cool. That's being rolled out on all their trucks along the sides.
So how widespread is that tape marking being added to all the trucks?
I'm not sure what their rollout is at the moment in terms of completion, but I'm certain the aim is to get it on all their big vehicles.
We've got a question here through from Samantha related to this question around the toll piece. Has the foundation done any research about increasing the visibility of cyclists in low light? The truck's journey follow European conspicuity standards. I think I stuffed that up. But is there anything from a cyclist sort of point of view? And I guess another one we had earlier was around visibility of cyclists. Should there be more done around?
Anything that a cyclist can do, obviously, to increase their visibility, we believe is a good thing. And there's a lot. I'm not a big favour of trying to legislate everything. I think at some stage you've got to use your noggin, and with the technology that's around today at the price that it is, and I'm talking about daylight visible lighting, there's no excuse to not be out there like a flashing beacon. And the motoring community is, they probably don't realise it, but they're subconsciously trained to be aware of bright flashing lights. I mean, even if the response is only because they think it may be a police car, it still gets your attention. And even on a bright sunny day, if you're riding down a road that's got a lot of tree cover, you're in and out of shadows, and it doesn't really matter what colour clothing you're wearing in daylight. When you go into those dark shadows, you sort of tend to disappear a bit. So that daylight visible lighting, front and rear, particularly from the rear, and preferably up a little bit high, I think is invaluable. Clothing can do a certain, like all black's probably your worst option. Any other colour, but all black's probably a better option. But even in daytime, like wearing white's not always the best option either. I don't believe. You drive down the road and see how much white backgrounded infrastructure and vehicles there is. If you're behind a white car and a white top, doesn't make you any more visible. You're probably better off on a black top in that situation. Mm-hmm. So I think the lighting there is the key, and there's no excuse. It used to be horrendously expensive, and now it's not expensive at all. So
And Craig here, Craig has asked a question here. Is the education material used in-house by Toll so their drivers available for the public to use?
Good question. We're actually looking at, we've just done these presentations, we do them live, but we're actually looking at filming that presentation, and that's a project that's in the pipeline at the moment, and then I guess it will be up to Toll to determine the distribution of that, but it's certainly something we can look at.
Fantastic.
Part of our two-way street campaign, and we've got a little image up here of some of the graphics, which I think are a bit outdated now, but this was the campaign that rolled out in New South Wales. And just to touch on a few things that you can do as a cyclist to look after yourself. We've already covered lights. It talks about fuel to prevent fatigue, and anyone that's done a long ride knows what happens when you run out of basically go from hero to zombie in about 10 metres, and your mind's not working too clearly when you hit the wall, running out of energy. So it's important to keep fueled up, both from a physical and a mental perspective, and also hydrated. Now we're coming into summer. You wouldn't know it, but I believe we are. And
it's around the corner.
It's around the corner, yeah.
We hope.
So that's important to remember as the weather warms up as well. Lighting, as we mentioned lighting, I saw a dude the other night heading down a road, pitch black, no street lights, not a light front and back, and dark clothing. Like,
do you want to be killed?
Yeah, not smart.
And that's why Phil here just made the exact same point. If they can't see you, they can't avoid you.
Exactly.
I mean, it's pretty simple line, that one.
Yep. Bike maintenance is another one. There's some really basic checks you should be doing before you hit the road. Obviously brakes is one, but head stem and handlebar tightness is another critical one, because if there's one thing that's going to bring you unstuck really quickly, it's that head stem either turning or handlebars rotating. So it's a check for tightness and it's a check for cracks. The other one for those of us that have, and most people do these days, bikes where the wheels have quick releases on them, always make sure they're done up. And the real trap here is if you've got multiple people involved in a situation, and this is why airplanes crash, it's a compounding thing of errors, like somebody takes your bike off the car and someone else puts your front wheel in and they just dropped it in there because they were in a hurry and then you didn't check it. I've seen people do a whole 100k ride with the front skewer undone. The only reason why they survived it was because they didn't go over a big enough bump to dislodge the wheel, but just think of the ramifications of that. So
especially at the front of the pack and it just happened to come undone.
Yep. So check all those things. All the bikes by law have those little retaining knobs on the front on the forks. It was pretty much standard practice, particularly if you're in a racing team, to file that off. It's now not permitted, which means you have to actually undo the thing a fair way before it will drop out versus just loosening it. So that's a good tip on that. Check your tyres. Make sure you can make sure you can avoid a lot of punctures just by checking them and removing bits and pieces of sharp stuff that gets stuck in the tyres before they work their way through to the tube, for instance. You're very rarely flat from the riding over the sharp object straight away. Normally takes a little while to work its way through, so you can pick those things out before you head out, particularly in wet weather, and you'll save yourself some pumping time on the side of the road.
We've got a good question here from Martin. We'll be feeding into the next section.
Good stuff. Expect the unexpected. Situational awareness is probably another way to describe this, and cyclists probably are the most situationally aware users on the road, but the important thing here is to keep all your senses available to you. So riding with earphones blaring in your ear, for instance, not a good idea. Hearing is one of the most important senses. You can determine what's happening behind you a lot by sound, and if you take away that sense, you're just reducing your chances of staying out of trouble.
It's quite obvious, really.
Yeah, I live in the country. I ride a lot on country roads, and I know when a vehicle has seen me if I hear it approaching from behind, because most times they will back off, even involuntarily, on the accelerator. so you hear the engine note change. If you don't hear that, you're looking over your shoulder to make sure that they've seen you. We've covered off helmets. Being predictable on the road is really important to indicate your intentions, but from a motoring perspective, you need to realise that not all cyclists are Kid 11s and can't ride down a straight 2-inch line all day without deviating. And the more inexperienced a cyclist is, the more you'll see this happening. It's like deviating from a straight line. If they look over their shoulder, they turn the bike, all those sorts of things. So motorists just need to be aware that not all cyclists are the same skill level, and a lot of cyclists get nervous around big traffic and heavy traffic. So that's something to be aware of. The last one, always stop on red. That's just one road rule. Always obey all the road rules, because basically human nature, everyone gets branded with the one brush. So if you're the dude that's running the red light or jumping up on the footpath to avoid it, or not indicating changing lanes, or whatever it is you're doing, riding without a helmet, not having lights at night, you just don't do a lot for the cyclist image and the motorist perception of the cycling community. So it's, you know, if you want respect, you need to earn it. That's how you earn it. It's one of the ways you earn it.
And the motorists always remember that one person that they won't think about the other 20 or 30 that passed.
Yep, and motorists never break the law. Otherwise, yeah, we all know that. So.
Well, this is where I think got a question here now from Martin. He's saying, how do we make drivers more cyclist friendly? I think this is where this next session feeds in nicely.
What I said, if you want respect, you need to earn it. And I think it's just take away the bike and the motorist. It's just pure common courtesy on the road. If somebody lets you in, give them a friendly wave with all your fingers in the air. You know, a little bit of that, just being courteous and respectful. Like I reckon I backed off driving here today to allow probably a dozen motorists to move in to my lane because they wanted to move across on a freeway or whatever. In some instances, putting that indicator on, people just close the gap. And so that's just motorist to motorist, let alone motorist to cyclist. So a little bit of courtesy will go a long way to solving a lot of these problems.
And you think about this point as well. If you drive courteous, you start the day quite often driving, you finish it driving, you guarantee your day will start and finish better if you just take a bit more time.
Absolutely. Coming up to the drive rules part of our two-way street campaign, you only see what you expect to see when you're doing your scans when you're driving. And if you don't expect to see a bike rider, chances are you won't see them. We all know about the mobile phone usage and keeping your eyes on the road. It's it just distresses me the number of people I see head down texting. They'd be better off holding the phone up and talking on it than doing that. It's just, and they think they're not getting noticed. Just really, really scary. In terms of this expect bike riders, I want to talk a little bit about blind spots and the blind spots in a vehicle. The A-pillar on all our modern vehicles is massive. It's got a couple of airbags in it that slopes back at about 15 degrees, so it starts out near your front indicator and finishes near your left ear or right ear. And it's you can hide a bus or a truck behind that A-pillar under the right circumstances. So a little physics lesson, if you're a driver, if you're on a collision course with something in your blind spot, it will stay in your blind spot until you hit it.
Hence the big pause now as well, not an agree at our end.
Off-fly airplanes, I was taught this really early. If you're going to collide with another airplane in the sky, it will appear as a stationary dot on your windscreen. It won't move relative to the screen. And the same thing applies to vehicles. If you've got something in your blind spot on either side, left or right, and you're on a collision course, and I'm thinking here about the obvious one is an uncontrolled crossroad in the middle of the country, and you see this all the time, an accident where a B-double's run into a train, or a train's run into another vehicle, or a truck's run into a truck. And you think, how would you miss that vehicle? But look at the size of the A-pillar, and if it's a truck, look at the big mirror that sits there, and it's pure physics. If you're going to hit it and it's in your blind spot, it doesn't come out of your blind spot. So what's the solution?
Hence what it's called.
That's why it's called a blind spot. The only way that you can clear your blind spot is to move your head. So you need to look forward or back, move your head forward or back to see into your blind spot. So if you're coming to any sort of an intersection that's not controlled, good idea to lean forward and lean back just to look around your blind spot, particularly in today's modern cars, because as I said, you can hide a B-double in there and you won't see it.
And even when you come up to a controlled one, like especially the green man's, and if you just come up that point, that pillar can just block out the vulnerable user as they're crossing there.
Absolutely. Yep, and if you the same rule applies. If they're walking on a collision course with you and you're coming through that that intersection at the right speed, they'll stay in that blind spot. So that's really, really critical. I'm not sure how well that's taught in young drivers learning to drive, but cars have changed. Like the A-pillar used to be about the size of your thumb back when I learned to drive.
We had a few of them on the farm.
Yeah. The old Mr. Bean's Mini. There's no blind spot there, but there is now. And I guess that's an example of vehicles being made safer for the occupant, but it's actually probably made it more dangerous for people in other vehicles.
For the vulnerable.
Yeah, not only vulnerable, you could be in another car. Yeah. The old door one is a classic. It is so easy to do, to not check, and I know I've nearly done it myself, and I know of cyclists who have doored cyclists accidentally. But just check your mirror, have a look over your shoulder. In Europe, they quite often promote that you open your driver's side door with your left hand. Or actually in Europe, it'd be the other way around. But so you open the door not with your right hand, but with your left hand, so it actually forces you to turn around.
That's a good idea.
To look over your shoulder. Another danger area there is passengers. Like if you've got a backseat passenger that can also open that door, but they don't have a mirror.
Put the child locks on them.
That would solve the issue.
So as long as the driver checks and you reach around, you can open the door for them.
Yep.
Or be a gentleman.
Yeah, but yeah, it's just that comes back to that first point. I always expect bike riders, and particularly as you get in closer to the city and places like, popular commute roads, absolutely critical. Indicating intentions early. Marilyn did some research a few years ago on, and she studied a whole bunch of accidents, and these were all videotaped, filmed with helmet cameras. And the interesting thing was that in, I think it was 75 or 80% of cases, the driver was at fault, but in about 80% of those cases, the driver didn't even realise they'd caused an incident. So, yeah, just really, really need to be aware of your surroundings. The others are pretty self-explanatory, following road rules, checking your speed, giving way where required, etc. But I'll just come back to this whole common courtesy and common sense issue.
So a good question here from Amanda. I'm a commuter and I'm not convinced that the 1 metre rule is being enforced by the police. What are some strategies that could be implemented to get better buy-in by enforcement from the police? Evidence from front and rear.
We're actually trialling at the moment a device which is marketed out of the States, which measures the distance a car passes you at. We've actually got a few of those in our hot little hands at the moment, because that's one of the things that police always raise in the consultation process before this legislation is introduced. And they go, well, if you can't measure it, there's no point in having it in there. But if you took out every piece of road law that you couldn't actually measure with a tape or a stopwatch, you wouldn't have many road laws. So it's not a valid argument. In terms of what we expect, it's not, our intention is not to have people to measure the success of this legislation by the number of tickets that are issued. It's more it's a clear statement that cyclists are legitimate road users, and it's a clear statement as to how you have to give them space on the road. Now, there are plenty of front and rear cameras now available, built into tail lights, and while it's not having a huge uptake from the judiciary and the police, I believe that's probably the way to go, is to record your own evidence. And while that may not have a big impact in the short term. I think it'll have a big impact in the long term. So there will always be instances, as we know with any law, where it's not obeyed. But we know in New South Wales, initially when they brought this legislation in, there was a pretty hard push on cyclists doing the right thing, and now they've gone a bit the other way and are really starting to take a good hard look at the motorists' reaction to that. And they'd had a recent policing campaign that they were proudly informed us of, that how many people they'd booked for not obeying the minimum passing distance. So it's not a magic bullet, but it's a big step in the right direction. This slide here talks about what motorists can do. We'll just carry adequate lighting, and there's our question earlier about if you can't see them, you can't avoid them. We absolutely support that. But some other things to be aware of, both as a rider and a driver, is position of the sun. So early morning, late afternoon commutes, where the sun's low on the horizon, it makes it really hard. We've talked about blind spots. So it's just basically, whenever you hit the road in a vehicle, you need to be super vigilant about all other road users, and I think we've all seen that awareness test that came out of the UK with the moonwalking bear going through a bunch of people passing basketballs. If anyone hasn't seen that, just Google moonwalking bear. That's a really scary thing to look at. It just talks about how when your attention's focused on one thing, how you completely miss something else.
And here's a good question from Michael, just sort of drawing into this now. A study in South Australia found that experienced, not experienced cyclists were seriously injured in road crashes most often, largely due to a level of complacency setting in. How do you combat this? How do you engage with groups who believe that they don't need further education?
That's a really good question, and that's one of the reasons why we like to run and have an involvement with some of these big cycling events like our own Grand Fondo. We've got Amy's Ride South Australia coming up in a few weeks. And they're all events that have multiple thousands of riders. And while they are great fundraisers for us and the organisations that run them, it also gives us a great opportunity to engage with cyclists and with the higher end cyclists that you're talking about, because our Grand Fondo is a qualification event for the Grand Fondo World Series. And we have a compulsory safety briefing. Everyone has to sit through that safety briefing. It's all online now. And there are questions, and you have to get them right before you get your race number. And so these events give us a great opportunity to talk with that exact demographic who believe they're invincible, think they're riding the Tour de France every day, and perhaps need that little bit of education that we're talking about. So that's how we like to message with those people.
Fantastic.
Excuse me. The last point on here is filtering at lights. Most people would be aware of this rule, but it is perfectly legal for a cyclist to move up through stationary traffic to get to the little green box at the front of the intersection if it happens to be there. My personal advice on this is that while that's probably a great idea in traffic that's not going very fast or very far, if there's only 4 cars there, I'm waiting behind the 4 cars because I know they've got to get past me again, and although I'll probably catch them at the next set of lights, there's no point in forcing even though I'm in the right, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense to do that at that point in time. It does make a lot of sense in heavy traffic because it means you're very visible from the first car off the rank, and so that I think that's a really valid one. And motorbikes are allowed to do the same thing. Although I saw someone doing that at about 120 km/h the other day on the Westgate Bridge, but not too clever. It's a long time since we all did our licences, some more than others, and it's an interesting thing about this legislation and the change that we've had around the country is that whenever it's proposed, it creates an enormous discussion on social media. And I reckon that's a great thing because this is probably the one road rule change that everybody talks about and everyone's aware of. in the country, and so it can only be a good thing. So people need to be aware that cyclists are permitted to ride two abreast in their lane or in the road lane. If there is a legit dinky-die, rigid-dig, properly signed cycling lane, then cyclists are required to ride in that lane when it's safe to do so. Another issue or a rule that people may not be aware of is that a cyclist may pass two cyclists riding two abreast, so at some stage it can be three abreast, completely legally. What cyclists need to be aware of is that, and motorists wouldn't understand this if they don't ride a bike, cyclists love getting what we call getting a sit, and getting a sit means getting out of the wind in the slipstream of the rider in front. And that's why when you're riding a group, it's a lot faster to ride in a group than it is to ride on your own, because you can share the load of pushing the wind aside. So the bike rider at the front is probably doing 70% more work than the person sitting straight behind him. Hence the reason why some cyclists get very irate if someone doesn't take their turn on the front. Not that we would ever do that. Where this becomes an issue is if you have a crosswind, because the slipstream sweet spot moves from directly behind the cyclist in front to the side opposite from what the wind is coming from. And where this becomes a problem is if the wind's coming from the left and you've got 10 riders riding two abreast, each rider will move a little bit to the right to stay in that slipstream. Now, while they're all riding two abreast, the law says you must ride as close as practical to the left-hand side of the road. Picture from behind, to a motorist, it looks like you're riding 10 abreast, because even though each of you is only riding two abreast, as you echelon across the road, you end up taking the whole lane, and from behind it looks like a mass of cyclists. But if you ask those riders, they say, yeah, we're only riding two abreast, but you're not staying close to the left. So if you're not in the Tour de France or you're not racing, you are required to stay as close as possible to the left. And this is probably the one thing that I see coming up most commonly as a point of contention between motorists and cyclists. Yeah, we're all riding two abreast. Yeah, but your back rider's like 10 metres from the left-hand side of the road, even though you're only riding two abreast, in inverted commas.
So it's like share the load in the front and share the load in the side.
Yep. In that situation, if you're a bike rider, you actually do get a sit on the right-hand side of that peloton, and so and rotate more often. So your time on the right-hand side of that peloton is your rest, and the time on the left-hand side you're doing the work, no matter where you are. So it's just the way it is. Cyclists are permitted and encouraged to make a hook turn. Anyone that's not from Melbourne will be scratching their heads right now. We're all brought up with trams, and a hook turn is basically, instead of pulling to the middle of the road to turn right, you basically pull to the left and take up pole position on the cross street, ready to take off when that light goes green. A lot safer than sitting out in the target zone where you may not be too visible at a busy intersection, particularly if there's big vehicles involved, because people just can't see you. Cyclists and motorists are required to give way to pedestrians. That one goes without saying.
And that should just, I think, hopefully answer Joe's question you had about what about riding across pedestrian crossings. So please let me know if that doesn't clarify that for you, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. Cyclists must give way to motorists. With the change of legislation in various states, a lot of states have gone back to allowing cyclists of all ages to ride on the footpath. Currently in Victoria, you need someone who's 12 years old with you to do that. But I know Queensland, SA, I think New South Wales have now introduced riding on the footpath as an option, but same rule, give way to pedestrians. So footpath's not a training space, and you must be cognizant of other people using that. Front and rear lights at night we've already covered. Some other key ones that cyclists must not do is to overtake a left-turning vehicle on the left, particularly a truck. Not too clever.
You only do it once.
Yeah, the rear wheels on a long truck track a lot further left than the front, and if you get caught in that space, not a good space to be. No one's allowed to use a mobile phone. We had a story related to us in Townsville recently from a toll driver who had a cyclist run into the back of their truck while using their iPad. Say no more.
I'm trying to work out how the toll driver actually felt that happen.
Well, I think it was because they were turning into their depot.
Oh.
So it sort of happened out front of the in front of the office. Roundabouts, tricky one. The roundabout law is now, I think, uniform throughout Australia, and the rule is that who's in the roundabout first has right of way. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter which part of the roundabout you're in. First in has right of way. Sorry, question?
So Joe's just gone for a clarification. No, I meant riding across crossings when on a shared path. Queensland and ACT have made this change.
Yeah, so you're allowed to ride. Sorry, on a shared path. You still have to give way to pedestrians.
Yep.
Yeah, it's basically the more vulnerable you are, you're the higher up the food chain. Is a way to think of it. In terms of who gives way to who. Those on foot, everyone has to give way to them. Roundabouts can be tricky because getting around a multi-lane roundabout on a bike in heavy traffic, if you want to turn right, means you really need to be cognizant of vehicles going straight ahead and exiting somewhere. So it's I've been around a roundabout a couple of times on the bike trying to aim because it hasn't been safe to make the exit. So everyone needs to be aware of that. Some practical considerations. We've already covered the skill level. Potholes or obstructions are like none of the roads where I live have any potholes or obstructions, but maybe where you do they may, particularly with this weather. Where there's plenty of potholes around at the moment with the rainfall that we've been having. So motorists need to be aware that although a cyclist may or is required to stay to the left, there are quite often legitimate reasons why it's not possible to do so. We mentioned cyclists being nervous about big vehicles passing at speed. Be cognizant of that. Be aware of the wind effect. We talked about crosswinds. What I'm talking about here is if you have a crosswind from the right. If you've ever ridden a bike in a strong wind, Sunday would have been a great example. You end up leaning into the breeze to maintain a straight line. And what happens when you pass somebody on a bike that's leaning into the breeze is you actually stop the breeze. The breeze, when you're next to them, disappears. And so what happens is they tend to move towards your vehicle. So it's a bit like if you were leaning on a door and somebody opened it unexpectedly, you would fall through the doorway. It's a very similar thing. So the message there is if it's a windy day, particularly from the right-hand side of the road, you need to probably give even more space to a bike rider because they may, when you go past, inadvertently move into the vehicle. We talked to toll drivers about heavy vehicle rear tracking, wheel tracking when turning, particularly if it's a B-double. They will cut, the further back you go down the truck, the more those wheels cut the corner. And you need to be aware of that both as a driver and as a cyclist, and that's why we're talking about that. Not a smart move to pass a left-turning vehicle. The other one we talked to our toll drivers about is the B-double trailer sway at speed. What we're referring to there is a really small steering wheel input on the prime mover can cause the B trailer, the second trailer, to move several metres right and left. So if that's the case, then a metre or a metre and a half becomes a very small margin if you're passing a cyclist. So obviously we encourage complete lane change. Who's that good-looking bloke on the bike there?
I have no idea, mate.
Toll's messaging, everyone has the right to get home safely, ties in exactly with their work place ethic plus their road message, and that's part of our tagline, is that everyone has the right to get home safely, whether they're riding for pleasure, for commuting, for training, or whatever. And dovetails very, very nicely in with the toll message.
I think it's fantastic. You've got a corporate's willing to stand up and support you in this way. It's a fantastic corporate social responsibility.
Absolutely, and I think it's not unnoticed by the rest of the transport industry either.
I think we've had plenty of questions we've been firing through today, which has been fantastic.
Thank you so much to our audience who have been engaging with us throughout, and yeah, we're so very grateful that you participated today, and we hope that you've gained a few tips and tricks that you can apply out on the road to keep us all a little bit safer. Simon, thank you so much for driving all this way, not cycling today, driving to deliver this webinar presentation, and I think I speak on behalf of all of our audience when I say that was extremely insightful, and thank you for sharing your story with us.
Absolute pleasure.
Jerome, always a pleasure working with you, and to our listeners, we hope you can join us for future webinars. Please do keep an eye on your emails for the recording and material that will be sent out later today. If you would kindly leave us your feedback, which will pop up on your screen when the webinar shuts down, we'd be delighted to hear from you. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you.